I just want to say right away that this is not for children. I'm dissecting Barney the Dinosaur on a psychological level, and some of the things that I discover should be considered trigger warnings for anybody that is faint of heart. Why is this important? Can you tell what's real? Can you understand what I'm telling you? Do you need me to tell you how to feel? How do you know where the truth comes from? How do you know whether sit or run? If I told you a lie, would you subscribe to the lie and carry it the rest of your life? If I told you to pick up a knife, would you question my motives? Would you take a life? Take my hand and you'll understand. This is where I reveal that everything that I'm telling you is going to expand how you think and feel. So this is the 1988 release of Barney, called Barney and the Backyard Game. This is where all of the themes start for the show that's going to be the main focus. All the songs come from this original show. It's based on a overly typical white American family with a stay-at-home mom, a dad that golfs, one white boy, one white girl. The neighborhood has one of every race of other child. They all come over and, without any adult supervision, play in a shack. It's honestly too perfect. And none of these kids, by the way, can be Googled. None of them ever did anything else in their acting career after this. Now I'd like to shift focus to a movie called The Voices with Ryan Reynolds in it. It's important to understand this movie moving forward because Ryan's character believes that he lives in a perfect and clean reality where everybody likes him and he is an acceptable member in society.
Yeah. Guess what? I'm not a peasant.
When in reality,
You totally stopped taking the pills, didn't you?
he's a demented hoarder and psychopathic killer. So what does this have to do with Barney the Dinosaur? The kids in Barney seem to have overly perfect and simple lives, when the problems that they face day to day are actually problems that children in poverty would face. And there are a lot of clues that their lives are not what we think that they are. Right off the bat, the very first thing that you hear when you watch Barney is that Barney's a part of your imagination. With that base fact, knowing that Barney's not real, we have to look at every scene and every interaction and imagine that there's not actually a character there and the children are not really talking to a dinosaur. Either the place that they play in every day is imaginary or it's real, and either the adults are real or there are no adults. What this does is create 4 possible scenarios for the reality they live in. If it's an imaginary place with real adults, I imagine it's a creepy situation where the adults are overly feely with the children and they don't realize what's going on. If it's a real place with real adults, I get the impression that it's more like a libertarian society in the future, something like the holodeck from Star Trek, where everything is seemingly perfect. If it's a real place with imaginary adults, then I get the impression that it's a sustainable area, kind of like a hippie commune, with no supervision whatsoever from adults because of their inherent freedoms. If it's an imaginary place and there are no adults, that makes me think that the children are undergoing extreme psychopathic delusions and living in complete garbage. So now we collect the facts. I'm going to take several data points from different episodes and try to determine which reality they actually live in. The first thing I want to draw attention to is the fact that they, every day after school, go and play in an abandoned train cart at an abandoned train station. For that, I'm marking a point towards the fake place. Now, every time some kid interacts with Barney, it's for some crisis, and it usually has to do with poverty, if you dig into it. This kid can't dance because of these shoes, and he's talking to Barney about it. These shoes were clearly given to him by like a grandpa, and his socks are like 5 sizes too big. But then Barney magically zaps in these $200 Air Nikes out of nowhere. This kid, living in poverty, suddenly getting a pair of $200 shoes paints a pretty gross narrative about the type of neighborhood that they live in. Every scene, somebody seems to be playing with garbage of some type. And I think that that also shows how impoverished they all are. If they really were in a rec center that is kept clean and monitored in some way where adults don't have to be there all the time, that they wouldn't be playing with garbage all the time. So this is another mark towards an imaginary location and imaginary adults. Here's what blows my mind. They're receiving actual mail right now, which means it could actually be real adults here. So we know that Barney's not real. So they're being mail for Barney gives me the impression that there is a person called Barney.
These are for Barney too.
So all of the kids commit felonies just going to get the mail. And then they summon their imaginary friend, who for some reason is incapable of opening mail, because he's imaginary, and so he asks the children to open it for him.
Would you open it for me, please?
Sure.
Something that's important to point out about these children is that they can't read and they can't count, and it's common throughout the show for them to be taught their ABCs and taught how to count to 3.
And we have 3 blood.
So their opening is mail, and they can't read it, but they know that it's a birthday card. So they decide to, using trash, make gifts for Barney.
It's a bookmark. Made it myself.
Garbage.
Nice.
It's a pencil holder. I made it out of a can, some paint, and some dry macaroni.
Garbage. In this next scene, Barney literally summons a rocket ship and they literally go to the moon. I have to assume that they're on drugs. Secondly, pay attention to the time of day.
We'll get a rocket ship.
It's the middle of the night, and these children are still, without any adult supervision, going on a drug high with Barney.
Park is getting a brand new fountain.
So this guy showing up changes a lot. He acknowledges that they are in a park, not a rec center, and he's a person, not an imaginary friend. In this scene, they're not even at the park. They're in a random place. Now, what gives me a huge clue about poverty in this situation is the type of dog we're looking at here. If you look at its paws, they're heavily deformed. If you look around its elbows, there's a lot of cancers. You look at the underbelly, and it's been bred. Typically, a dog would end up like this if they're force inbred, which is always done in impoverished situations where people are trying to sell dogs. The fact that there's trash readily available all over the park at all times tells me that it's not near as clean as they make it out to be. What's crazy about this is that Barney literally jumps up and gets it. If he's imaginary, how did he get the kite? Unless there's a person that's pretending to be Barney and their kids just go along with it.
I want to be like Barney.
Here's another clue that Barney is a real person that the kids are imagining is just the doll.
The word no can be a very good thing.
Now they're giving a play to nobody. Their parents are not there watching this play. If this were real life, the children's parents would be there. With now nearly 20 data points telling us whether or not the place or the adults are real or imaginary, we come to the unfortunate conclusion that it is most certainly a fake place, but it falls right in between real adults and imaginary ones. Not good. Recall from earlier that if it was an imaginary place with imaginary adults, that it was like they were living in garbage in the slums with no adult supervision. If it was an imaginary place with a real adult, they had some sort of predatorial interactions with the people around them. It being right in the middle says that not only do they live in complete garbage, but also they're a constant threat from predators. That's the real Barney the Dinosaur. Thanks for watching.